Imagine waking up tomorrow to the sound of rain tapping on your window. You check the forecast and it says showers all day. You pull your blanket tighter, thinking you'll just wait it out. But the next morning, it's still raining. And the next week. And the next month. Soon the weeks blur into years. The years harden into centuries. Generations of humans are born, grow old and die, having never seen a single ray of sunlight, living entirely under a heavy leaking ceiling of endless gray clouds. Now, scale that up. Multiply that torment by thousands. Roughly 234 million years ago, our planet entered a nightmare that defies human comprehension. It didn't just rain for a season, or a decade, or a century. It rained, nearly non-stop, for 2 million years. This wasn't the gentle spring shower. It was a torrential, world-altering deluge known to science as a Carnian Pluvial episode. Before this event, Earth was a mega desert dominated by strange, prehistoric beasts struggling to survive in a hyper-arid wasteland. By the time the skies finally cleared, the old world was entirely drowned, and the foundations for a new empire were laid. This is the story of the time the sky broke and how a 2 million-year storm inadvertently created the age of the dinosaurs. To understand why a 2 million-year rainstorm was so catastrophic, we have to look at what Earth looked like right before the first drop fell. This was the Triassic period. There were no separate continents, no Atlantic Ocean, no localized weather systems as we know them today. There was only Pangea, a singular, gargantuan supercontinent surrounded by a global ocean called Panthalassa. Because Pangea was so incredibly vast, the moisture from the global ocean could never reach its deep interior. The heart of the supercontinent was a colossal, brutal megadesert. Temperatures routinely soared to levels that would cook modern life alive. The air was dry, thin, and choked with dust. The dominant creatures of this era were not the dinosaurs we see in museums. Dinosaurs existed, but they were small, rare, and ecologically insignificant, scavengers dodging the footsteps of the true rulers of the Triassic, the rhynchosaurs and the massive, armored, reptile-like ancestors of crocodiles. For millions of years, this world of fire and dust remained perfectly stable. Life adapted to scarcity. It evolved to hoard water, to survive on almost nothing. Pangea was a planet frozen in a permanent baking summer. But deep beneath the surface, a planetary fuse had already been lit. The trigger for the endless rain didn't come from the sky. It erupted from the crust. Deep beneath what is now Western Canada, Alaska, and the Pacific Northwest, a massive tectonic tear occurred. This area, known to modern geologists as the Wrangellia Large Igneous Province, began to tear itself apart. For thousands of years, colossal volcanic eruptions tore through the Earth. This wasn't a sudden explosion like Mount Vesuvius. It was a continuous, agonizing venting of the planet's interior. Billions of tons of basaltic lava flooded the landscape, but the true killer was invisible. The eruptions pumped unimaginable quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane directly into the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect didn't just accelerate, it exploded. The global temperature on Pangea, already brutally hot, spiked by an additional 3 to 10 degrees Celsius. The massive global ocean, Panthalassa, began to boil under the heat, absorbing solar energy like a giant solar panel. As the ocean water warmed, it began to evaporate at an unprecedented, frantic rate. The air became thick, heavy, and saturated with billions of megatons of water vapor. The mega monsoon of Pangea was charging its batteries. And then the atmosphere couldn't hold the weight anymore. It started with a shift in the wind. The intense heat over the Pangean landmass created a massive low-pressure zone, sucking the superheated, moisture-choked air from the Panthalassa Ocean directly into the heart of the continent. When that wet, boiling air hit the high mountain ranges of Pangea, It lifted rapidly, cooled, and condensed. Somewhere in the interior of that ancient desert, a single drop of rain hit the dry sand. Then another. Within hours, a storm system the size of a continent unleashed its fury. At first, the baked desert soil couldn't absorb it. The water didn't bring life, it brought violence. Flash floods miles wide roared through canyons that hadn't seen water in 10 million years, carving massive river valleys out of solid stone overnight. If you were a creature living through those first few weeks, you might have thought it was a temporary anomaly, a passing season of chaos. But weeks became months, and the rain didn't stop. The moisture loop was locked. The warm oceans evaporated water, the hot land pulled it in, and the sky dumped it back down. The rain had become a permanent feature of the earth. To understand the sheer scale of 2 million years of rain, consider this. Human civilization has only existed about 10,000 years. The entire history of our species, from agriculture to the internet, is a mere drop in the bucket compared to the duration of this single storm event. As the millennia rolled on, the face of Pangea was utterly transfigured. The great sand seas vanished, buried under thick layers of mud, silt, and clay. The rivers, constantly fed by the relentless downpour, expanded into massive permanent river networks and vast acidic lake systems. But this wasn't pure, clean water. Because the atmosphere was still saturated with volcanic sulfur and carbon dioxide, the rain falling from the sky was highly acidic. It literally ate away at the rocks, dissolving minerals and washing them into the sea at a frantic rate. The oceans became choked with runoff, triggering massive dead zones as oxygen levels in the water plummeted. Marine life suffered catastrophically. Coral reefs, which had thrived in the warm, clear Triassic seas, collapsed entirely, dissolved by the increasingly acidic waters. The world was being scrubbed clean, both on land and in the sea, by a relentless global power wash. For the established rulers of Pangea, the Carnian Pluvial episode was a slow-motion apocalypse. The plants they had adapted to eat, the tough, drought-resistant desert scrub, couldn't survive in a waterlogged, humid world. They rotted from the roots up. As the vegetation shifted, the dominant herbivores, like the rhynchosaurs, began to starve. Their heavy, sprawling bodies, perfectly designed for walking across hard, dry plains, became a liability. They sank into the endless mud, trapped in a world they no longer understood. More than 30% of all terrestrial species vanished during this 2 million year deluge. But in the shadows of this ecological collapse, a tiny group of opportunistic survivors saw an opening: the early dinosaurs. Before the rain, dinosaurs were a minor lineage, accounting for less than 5% of all land animals. But dinosaurs possessed a secret weapon. They were exceptionally adaptable, fast, and agile. Their upright posture allowed them to sprint through the mud rather than wallow in it. More importantly, as the old desert flora died out, massive new forests of conifers, giant ferns, and cycads exploded across the wet, humid plains of Pangea. The dinosaurs evolved rapidly to exploit this new, abundant food source. By the time the 2 million years of rain finally began to ease, the dinosaurs hadn't just survived, they had diversified, multiplied, and conquered every corner of the continent. Around 232 million years ago, the volcanic engines of Rangelia finally began to cool. The output of greenhouse gases slowed to a crawl. The planet's climate control system, pushed to its absolute limit, slowly began to rebalance itself. One afternoon, somewhere over the transformed plains of Pangea, the rain stopped. The clouds fractured, parted, and for the first time in 2 million years, the sun shone down on a completely unrecognizable world. The great megadesert was gone, replaced by sprawling, lush green belts of coniferous forests and dense jungles. The old rulers of the Triassic were dead and buried under miles of sedimentary rock. When the sun came out, it illuminated a world owned by the dinosaurs. They had stepped into the storm as minor players. They emerged from it as the undisputed masters of the earth, a reign that would last for the next 160 million years. Without that 2 million-year rainstorm, the iconic giants we marvel at today, the Tyrannosaurus, the Brachiosaurus, the Stegosaurus, would likely never have existed. The history of life on our planet was rewritten by a weather anomaly. How do we know all of this actually happened? How can science confidently describe a rainstorm that ended hundreds of millions of years before the first human opened their eyes? The answer is written inside the stones beneath our feet. All over the world, from the Dolomite Mountains in Italy to the red cliffs of the American Southwest and deep within the river basins of China, geologists kept finding the exact same anomaly. They would be excavating thick layers of ancient, wind-blown desert sandstones, indicating millions of years of uninterrupted drought. Then, suddenly, there would be a sharp, unmistakable break. A thick, dark, muddy siltstone, river pebbles, and fossilized ancient soils that could only form under conditions of intense, prolonged, and violent rainfall. When scientists used radioactive dating on these global muddy layers, the results always matched perfectly. 234 million years old at the bottom, 232 million years old at the top. The Earth had kept the receipt for the flood. It was a global geological fingerprint of a time when the entire planet was systematically drowned. The Carnian Pluvial episode is more than just a fascinating piece of prehistoric trivia. It is a stark, terrifying reminder of a fundamental truth about our planet. The climate we take for granted is shockingly fragile. Earth didn't enter a 2 million-year monsoon because of an asteroid or an external cosmic force. It happened because the planet's own internal systems shifted, triggering a runaway feedback loop that the atmosphere couldn't stop. Today, we look at our oceans, our rainforests, and our seasonal rains and assume they are permanent fixtures of human life. We schedule our days, our economies, and our societies around the belief that the weather will always return to a familiar baseline. But our deep past tells us otherwise. The planet doesn't care about our schedules. It operates on a scale of deep time, where deserts can become oceans, and where a single shift in atmospheric chemistry can break the sky for 2 million years. We live our lives under a sun that we assume will always shine. But history shows that the rain can always return. And it makes you wonder, if the sky broke tomorrow, who would survive the next great storm? Thanks for watching, and as always, ask yourself, is anyone watching?